Hello and welcome to Lord of the Board. My name is Sam and today we are going to be doing a list of the top 10 games I played in 2022 in the middle of 2023 because I'm late like always. But I thought that it would be a fun idea to give basically a good idea of each of these games. I'm not going to go into super amount of depth of each of these. I'm going to give you guys an overview of each of these games. And then I'm going to be giving you two striking features as to why the game made it on this list. And hopefully those reasons and my discussion on them will help you determine whether any of these games you might want to add to your collection. Now let's start at number 10 with the list. This is going to be Star Wars Villainous Power of the Dark Side. Now this is from the Villainous system. It started with Disney and then it went over to Marvel and now we've got the first Star Wars Villainous. Now this game takes the action selection system that you find in Scythe, where essentially you're going to be moving a token from one space to another, not being able to repeat the same action space. And those action spaces say exactly what you can do. And in Villainous, it's going to be gaining power. You're going to have the ability to play some cards. You're going to have the ability to discard cards. You're going to have the ability to fate your opponents and slow them down in the game. But the theme here is that everybody's going to be playing a villain. So in Star Wars Villainous, there's going to be Darth Vader, you're going to have Kylo Ren, you're going to have Asajj Ventress, you're going to have General Grievous, and as well as Moff Gideon, kind of one from each of these different timelines and eras. And each of them has an asymmetric goal to win the game. For example, Darth Vader has to kind of take Luke and make him confused and conflicted with the dark side and then bring him to the throne room and then fully make him commit to the dark side. And it takes a very specific set of things in order to happen. Whereas Moff Gideon has to find Grogu, capture the child, essentially put them in the lab and experiment on them. So you're going to feel very, very evil if you win the game as Moff Gideon. However, the game is so easy to kind of get into because all it is it's run by a deck of cards. This is going to be called your villain deck. And you are going to be drawing, a hand of cards every single turn, drawing back up to that hand and using those cards to complete your goal. And the deck is literally built to complete your goal. So depending on how well you can manipulate your deck and how well you know your deck, that's going to basically determine how fast you can complete your unique goal. But then you've got this other deck, which has the white back. This is called a Fate deck. And this deck is going to be what opponents use against you throughout the game. So your opponents might see that you're getting really, really close to winning. So they might use a Fate action on their player board, and they're going to grab two cards from the top of your individual Fate deck. And this is going to contain heroes from your individual story. If I'm playing Darth Vader, I'm going to be encountering Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, as well as Chewbacca. And if I'm playing character like Moff Gideon, I'm going to be encountering the Mandalorian or maybe IG-88, stuff like that. There's going to be different characters in each of these Fate decks that are tailored directly to your deck. The first striking feature of this game is going to be that it makes me feel like I am watching Star Wars, yet I can change the course of how the movies play out. And it really, really is immersive in that way. And the second striking feature is its simplicity to teach the gameplay, yet it still is very much a complex system and idea. It's the fact that this is an asymmetric game, yet the main core mechanic of just going through a deck and you're able to complete your goal, as well as moving your mover from one space to another, and it literally tells you what actions you can do on your turn. It really isn't a hard teach. It's pretty darn easy to teach. And that is really why Star Wars Villainous Power of the Dark Side has made it in my top 10 of 2022 releases. And in spot number 9, we have got Circadian's Chaos Order. This is a game where you're going to be playing alien factions in a giant war game. And the coolest part about this game is that, one, it is very, very much a lot like the original Dune 1979 board game. That game had kind of this tactical gameplay where you're moving in, you're trying to take over territory. But the main key feature that makes this game kind of unique is that every faction in the game has their own personal goal to win, but they also have a shared goal of basically controlling all of the relics. But here's the kicker, is that these relics, there's 6 of them throughout the game, and every single round they basically fly up off the map in order. Whoever owns the current round's relic actually gets it on their player board, which does different things for different factions. But essentially, as these relics start flying up round by round, the map starts shrinking on what you need to control to win the game. Because remember, if you control all of the relic spaces, you can win immediately. So once there starts getting about 3 relic spaces, the game starts getting really, really tense, where players might actually have the ability to control all 3 spaces with those relics. And those relic meeples are absolutely gorgeous. They are huge and they are awesome. And I love the artwork in this game. It is very striking. The combat in this game uses a combat wheel similar to that of Scythe and Dune 1979, the board game. All of those things. Also, by the way, the Dune game is reprinted by Gale Force 9, so that's going to be the same game. Every comparison I'm making to that is going to be the same. But what are my striking features of this game? First off, what I already talked about, the shrinking area control. I think that is so cool that slowly throughout the game, these relics are just flying up and the map feels like it's just shrinking and people can win at any moment very, very quickly. But 2, it is the action selection system, which I have not talked to you about yet, but I'm going to talk to you about right now. The coolest thing about this game, in my opinion, is the fact that everybody has these action tokens that have different prices on them of energy, different amounts. It could be a little bit, it could be a lot. And every single turn at the beginning of a round, players are going to be placing those action tokens on the board on an action space. And then on the turn where everybody's actually choosing what actions they do, whether it's movement, recruitment, gaining technology, building buildings, they're going to basically have to pay the price that is set by the players around the table. So it's kind of this interesting crunch of, if I put a really expensive tile in the space where players are able to actually make movements throughout the game. A lot of players really need to make movement, especially later in the game. They might actually pay that expensive price because they have to move. But if they can't afford it, then you're not going to get a payout. So it's this balance of how much can I bet that the other players at the table are going to be able to do an action, and how much can I stretch, how much energy can I get out of them. It is such a tense action selection system, and I absolutely love that all of the prices are determined by the players every single round, and you can kind of start counting tiles and realizing what they have left, so you can kind of bet on actions that you might get for cheaper later, or actions that might come up more expensive later. Very cool game, very unique setting, one that I absolutely love to get to the table. Spot number 8, we have got Tribes of the Wind, or as I like to call it, Nausicaa, the board game. If you get the reference, you get the reference. But essentially, this is set in a post-apocalyptic theme with kind of a lighter post-apocalyptic theme where players are going to basically be restructuring the landscape, clearing out pollution on the board, placing down tiles that are eventually going to give them victory points. But the main kind of kicker of the gameplay is the fact that when you're playing your actions, it's like playing a card from your hand, except that the restrictions on how to play a card change depending on the card and are very, very unique. Essentially, there are 4 elements. There might be fire, wind, water, or nature. And these element cards actually have different ways to play them. So a fire card might say that you have to have 2 fire cards in your hand in order to play it. So you look around in your hand, you have 2 fire cards, you can just play the card. Some cards might say that you have more fire cards than your neighbors. And so you're going to check around the table and see, oh, well, my neighbor doesn't have any fire cards, but this neighbor does. And that determines how strong of an action you get on that card. Some cards basically are abilities that pop off depending on how many you and your neighbors have of a certain suit, and that will determine how strong the card play is. And the backs of the cards are all basically the elements. So you're not only playing your hand, but you're also keeping aware of your neighbor's hands, and you're looking at the backs of their cards to determine what you can actually do on your turn and how reasonable it is to keep on to certain cards. Throughout the game, you're going to be going for objectives mostly in order to get victory points. You're going to start with one and then you can gain more throughout the game. But these objectives might tell you where to place these certain types of buildings, which could be the shrines. And they also might tell you where to place villages or tiles to cover up on your board, or that you have no pollution, or that you have, 3 tiles in a row of the same color. There's all these different things that you're trying to do with your player board, but you're balancing all of that with how can I make most efficient my hand, and how can I keep track of what other players are doing, my neighbors, in order to be able to use these action cards. Honestly, the 2 striking features that bring me back to this game are, 1, being able to play cards based on what your opponents have in their hand, I think is a very, very fun concept. And by the time it gets to your turn, their hands might change, which might determine that you can't actually do what you thought you could. And I love that concept. And 2, I think that the game is actually very approachable and easy to teach and has a really cool theme. Unfortunately, the theme doesn't speak to the mechanics super well, but what it does do is it draws people in. I think this is a great game, kind of a step up after they play their first gateway game. I think this is kind of that perfect step up after that if people want just something with a little bit more meat. Tribes of the Wind is that perfect game. Then we've got Caper Europe in spot number 7. This is a super fun game that is kind of hard to pinpoint on exactly how it is. It is a 2-player only game where essentially you're going to be drafting cards and building a tableau of cards that are all going to score you points. And so every single round, you're going to go back and forth between basically playing thieves to the different locations on the board, or playing gear cards to those thieves that you placed the turn previous. So essentially it goes play thieves, then play gear, then play thieves, then play gear. Throughout the game though, you're going to have your hand of cards, you're going to choose one to play, and then you're going to pass the hand to your opponent, and then you're going to repeat that until you only have 1 card left in your hand, and then you discard that card. So you're really just drafting with your opponent, and it's like a mind game of like, ooh, what I have currently in my hand, if I don't take this card that's going to give me 4 coins right now, I'm giving my opponent the opportunity to get those 4 coins right now. And that is the kind of decision making that you have to go into when playing this game. It's also cool because there's 4 different cities that kind of give the game a different flavor. You can play in places like Rome, Paris, or London, and each of these kind of adds a new mechanic to the game, making it a little bit different every single time you play, which is super fun. And also the way that you're really gaining points throughout this game is you're kind of battling over these locations like I was saying. These locations each have a tug of war mechanism where you're going to be pushing this token back and forth, and if that token is closer to you at the end of the game, you're going to win that location and you're going to score some victory points. It's a very, very dynamic 2-player game that I absolutely love, and me and my wife have been enjoying it so freaking much. The 2 striking features of this game that make it on this list is, 1, the amazing production behind this game. Seriously, looking at this box, looking at the production, it feels so luxe, so deluxe. It is absolutely stunning. I absolutely love touching the cards. I love looking at the artwork. I love seeing all the components. This is one of the most beautiful games ever. The fact that it comes in this nice little small box and it's packaged so perfectly. And 2, the graphic design. The graphic design is so good in this game that literally you could not play for a long time and you come back to it and it just makes sense with everything on the board, with everything in your hand. It is so clear. You can just grab the reference card and boom, you're ready to go. It is just that simple, just that clean, and that is why Caper Europe is my number 7. In spot number 6, we've got another game called Mythic Mischief. This is mostly just a 2-player game. There is a 4-player variant, but I've only played it at 2, and I think it's primarily built as a 2-player game. Essentially, this is going to be a abstract strategy game where you're going to be playing these students and you are trying to get the other fellow students of your opponent in the way of the Tome Keeper. This Tome Keeper is like this grumpy librarian. He's going to be kind of walking from these points on the map throughout the board, and you know which path. He's going to take the shortest path to each point. So you know where he's going to go. He's going to be going between these bookshelves, making it there, and then going to the next point. And what you're trying to do on your turn is you're trying to make it really, really tricky and puzzly for your opponent to get out of the Tome Keeper's way. And so you might be moving bookshelves to control the path of the Tome Keeper, putting it right in the path of your opponent, catching the student and giving yourself a victory point. Or you might force a student in the way of the Tome Keeper to get some points. There are so many different mechanics at play, and the coolest part about this is that there are many different factions within the game, and each of those factions are unique. They have different special abilities and ways to manipulate the board. And it's really, really, really cool when you get that powerful turn where you were actually able to get all of your opponent's 3 students in the way of the Tome Keeper, giving yourself 3 victory points. So much different things you can do in this game, and I absolutely love the puzzle of it. It is such a fun, abstract strategy game. The 2 striking features, the reasons why it's here on this list, it's going to be the fact that this is essentially asymmetric chess. I love chess. I love this game, and they both I love for the same reason. I can sit down and I know what I have to do. But the thing about it is that it's so asymmetric that players are going to be doing it differently. They're going to be solving the puzzle differently, and everyone I've played this with has approached the game in a different way, and I think that is just a really, really cool plus to the game design here. My other striking feature is that amazing theme. And you know, these 2 striking features go hand in hand because we've got an abstract game that I truly believe to be a thematic abstract game. There are so many elements in this game that are just dripping with theme. The Tome Keeper gets slower after lunch because they've eaten food. These are elements that mechanically make sense and thematically make sense in an abstract game, and that is just awesome. So that is why Mythic Mischief is at spot number 6. And we have gotten spot number 5, Ahoy by Leader Games. Ahoy is a pirate-themed asymmetric war game where you are going to basically be using a lot of dice manipulation to do your actions on your turn. However, depending on who you're playing might determine your goals throughout the game. Now, the coolest thing about this game is that you're going to have the 2 warring factions. You're going to have the Bluefin Squadron versus the Mollusk Union. And these 2 factions are going to be constantly clashing, trying to basically take control of these regions of the map, gaining victory points equal to that tile's wealth value. But here's the thing. The wealth value of those tiles is determined by the other 2 players at the table, the smuggler factions. They are going to be, trading, dropping off, basically playing a pick up deliver game. And as they are picking up and delivering, they're going to be upping the wealth of those regions, and that's going to give more victory points to the area control factions. It's kind of awesome and very, very ingenious how well this game works. And the thing is that everyone runs off of the same basic core mechanic, which is dice manipulation. Everybody's going to be rolling dice at the beginning of their turn, and you're going to be assigning dice to different parts of your player board. Those are going to show how fast you can move, how strong your combat's going to be this round, where you can tailwind to, which is basically like just teleporting around the map with your flagship. All of these special abilities too that are unique to your specific class. I think that this game has such a good way of breaking down an asymmetric game, an asymmetric war game even, and essentially allowing it to be very approachable by keeping the basic core game mechanics very, very simple. The striking features for Ahoy is kind of the fact that this is kind of that next up asymmetric game. If you want to kind of prep them for really, really highly asymmetric game design, this is kind of that perfect in-between spot that is not easy, but it's not difficult to teach. Like, I could start with Villainous, for example, and then move them up to Ahoy, and then move them up to like Root, or something like that. Like, this is that perfect game where I can really get people into realizing why asymmetric game design is so freaking cool and interesting. And it does it so well with beautiful, beautiful artwork. The other striking feature is that dice manipulation. I think the dice manipulation in this game is really cool. I love the fact that when you're placing those dice, it all matters. It really does. Like, that is the most important aspect of the game. Like, that's what determines what you can do on your turn. And one of the coolest things is that, like, when you're battling each other with your flagships, you actually are starting to lose spots that you can place your dice if you take damage. So your opponents get to choose what they damage on your ship, and that's going to start limiting what you can do. You might not be able to shoot off your cannons anymore because you lost your cannons. I love that. It's a really cool thematic tie-in, as well as it makes the dice manipulation super tense. And that is why Ahoy takes spot number 5 on my list. And in spot number 4, we have got Wayfarers of the South Tigris. This is actually the first in a trilogy of games, but it is the third in the trilogy. Essentially, there was the North Sea trilogy and then the West Kingdom trilogy, and now we have got the South Tigris trilogy. The Wayfarers one, you're going to be basically cartographers and astronomers. Basically, what you're trying to do is you're trying to build tableaus that will score you the most victory points at the end of the game. The land cards are all going to be played to the left of your player board. The water cards are going to be played to the right of your player board. And then there are these space cards, which are going to be played to the top of your board. Those space cards are going to be a lot of end game scoring or triggers. But then also there's this whole set collection aspect where all of these cards can have these symbols. And the more of each of those symbols that you have at the end of the game, you're going to be getting victory points as well. Now, there's a couple of different types of actions. There's worker placement in this game, and there's also dice placement in this game. You'll be putting workers onto cards that are in the open market around the player board. And when those cards are grabbed by players, they're also going to get that worker in order to place for themselves. So you're going to have like a different changing amount of workers throughout the game, and not all workers are equal. The blue workers are able to activate those water cards, the yellow workers are able to activate the land cards, and the green workers are able to be placed anywhere, so they're really, really useful. But on top of the worker placement, you can also be placing dice on your turn. In the beginning, you're going to be rolling dice. And depending on what number you actually roll, it's going to mean something different for your player board. You have this caravan section of your player board that determines what each face of your die actually means for you. So you can actually basically change what symbols your dice gives you, and that can determine on where you actually place your dice for the action. The only other thing besides placing a worker or placing a dice that you can do on your turn is a rest action where you're going to be gaining some income, and you're also going to be moving up this center track, which is going to eventually trigger the end of the game. So what you're going to find a lot in this game is a lot of set collection. You're going to be finding a ton of insane decisions because there are so many things to think about in this game. You think in most Euro games that there's like, a couple different paths to go down. At the beginning of this game, your mind is just racing because there are literally like 20 different decisions that matter at the very first turn of the game. And the fact that me and Kate played Wayfarers the very first time, and we kind of stopped and realized that we absolutely sucked at it, and that every single action that we did, we felt like we were kind of doing unoptimally. We just wanted to play again and again. And that's kind of the feeling that this game gives you. But what are those two striking features that really gave it this spot in my list? The first is going to be the fact that you're going to be building multiple tableaus, and I think that it's really beautiful that it actually paints a picture of your land. You're actually going to be having those land cards and water cards down first, and then you can be placing those space cards on top. And at the end of your game, you can look at your board and you can see this beautiful picture being made. And the other striking feature is the fact that you're building what your dice does throughout the game, and what your dice do changes throughout the game. And I think this is an absolutely awesome puzzling game mechanic. I just love the fact that you're going to be adding tiles to that caravan, and wherever you're placing them is going to change what effect your dice side gives. I think that is such a clever way to make a cool engine, as well as being a really, really puzzling game mechanic. And that is why Wayfarers stands at spot number 4 on my list. In spot number 3, we have got Brazil Imperial. Now, I think this is the Portal version that released in 2022. This is a 4X Euro game where you're going to be taking over Brazil. You're going to basically be building buildings. You're going to be building units. You're going to be researching technology. You're going to be then upgrading buildings to get more resources. And kind of similar to the game Scythe, those resources that you create are actually going to be on the board physically and can be stolen by your opponents. But the gameplay here is so easy and nice and clean. It uses the same action selection system that is in Scythe and that is in Star Wars Villainous. In fact, this game bears a lot of resemblance to Scythe. It's kind of in the same vein of gameplay. The thing here is that in Brazil Imperial, as you're kind of making your turns, you might be establishing trade, you might be gaining resources, building buildings, creating units, whatever you do. No matter what you do, is you're going to be kind of collecting victory points towards the end of the game, and the player with the most victory points wins. That means that you can spend the entire game not doing any combat, not doing any fighting at all, and still win. Now, it might be hard if somebody goes really, really heavy on the military strategy and they kind of slowly pressure your units with theirs and you don't have any defenses. It could really kind of take you back and set you back quite a bit. But the fact that you don't have to is one of the things that I like about this game a lot. However, my 2 striking features of this game are 1, the approachable 4X gameplay. It takes basically all of the things that you can do in 4X games and simplifies all of them. It might even simplify them too much for some people. For me, I really enjoy this because this is just a way to get people more into games that I enjoy, and I found Brazil Imperial to have a perfect balance of complexity and simplicity. I think it did a really good job balancing all that. The second striking feature is those striking meeples, the meeple colors. I love the colors and the aesthetics of this game. I think they did such a good job. As well as in the artwork. I mean, I'm going to kind of put all the art and the meeples and all of the graphic design, basically all the visuals of this game. That's its striking feature. The second one that really gets me into the game. When you build the map at the beginning, there are different parts of Brazil and the maps look very, very lush and vast. And each of the player colors is very, very beautiful. And those meeples, like I said, they're all striking and each player has some of the unique meeples that they have for themselves. This game just has a really nice, beautiful production of even the resources that are going to be populating on the board. It is so much fun to build a building, place those physical little tokens on there, and then use and spend those tokens, and then build more buildings and just expand and expand and expand. That is why Brazil Imperial takes spot number 3 on today's list. All right, so we have made it to the top 2 games, and we are going to start by talking about Crescent Moon. Now, I did a really in-depth review and video on Crescent Moon, so if you want to check out that, definitely check out the link below. But Crescent Moon is a 4 or 5 player game, and that's probably going to be the biggest deterrent to a lot of people for this game. But the reason why it is 4 or 5 is that this game is so asymmetric. It is all these factions that feed directly off of one another. If you take 2 out of the game, there isn't a way that this game can work. There are factions that bring in about the economy like the Sultan. There is a faction that is going to be basically just warring and fighting around called the Warlord. They're going to be getting points for destroying buildings and sacking settlements. And then you've got a faction that is all about influencing the Hexes, the Mershid Empire. They're going to be going around sneakily. They're going to be, causing disruption and influencing certain tiles. They don't care about, military control. They're just politically influencing, and that's how they're going to be gaining victory points. They can even kind of move fights the way that they want to kind of move fights, depending on if they're in a territory. So they can really do a lot of cool, sneaky stuff. And then you've got kind of the Caliph, who is the faction that is trying to maintain order. build buildings. They want to make a good relationship with the Sultan for that economical boost. Lots of different things like that. And then lastly, you've got the Nomad, which only comes into play if you're playing a full 5-player game. This player basically provides mercenaries to other factions. The Sultan doesn't have any military at all, so they have to buy mercenaries from the Nomad if they want to do any sort of military presence on the board. And so all of these factions are going to be feeding each other in this crazy, crazy economy. And right at the beginning of the game, there is this super, super thin line between who's your friend and who's your foe. Everybody's friends, everybody's foes. That's how it feels. It is very, 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 very entangled is the word. And the other thing is that the objectives of each of these factions are different, and on your player board, it literally shows what your objectives are and how you score victory points. What does your faction have to do? It also shows every action that you can do on your turn and explains it in full, like a rule book, what you can do. This is something that's taken from a lot of coin game designs where the player aid is actually literally what you can do on your turn. It explains it in pure language. This game is kind of like it's inspired by coin games, but doesn't share any real mechanics with coin games. However, the spirit of coin games, I do believe to be in Crescent Moon, and I think that this game is such a good experience. It's so freaking neat the way that it works. If you get 5 players around the table to play this, it is like Dune 1979, the second time I mentioned that game. As you can tell, I love that game too. But it's like that game, but just so much more complex at the very, very start of the game. So the 2 striking features in Crescent Moon. First, the entanglement of the factions. The fact that at the very beginning of the game, you are completely entangled with your enemies. There is not a site nearby that is unoccupied by an opponent usually. It is just straight up political negotiation right from the start. You have to figure out how you're going to make it through, and you're going to have to start making deals very early. Choose your enemies wisely, keep your friends close, and keep your enemies closer is kind of how it feels. And then my second striking feature is going to be that shared economy, because one thing I didn't explain is that there is cards that are going to be laid out as a market. And when you buy to a card that belongs to a faction that isn't yours, that money goes directly to that player. And that right there, folks, is one of the coolest ways to make such an interesting shared economy right at the start of the game. You could have so much money just by having a really, really good set of cards in that market. So much cool stuff happening in Crescent Moon, and that is why it is my top 2 game of 2022. Alrighty, we have come to the top of the list here. My top game of 2022 is going to be Wonderland's War. I don't know if you know this, but I actually dig the Alice in Wonderland theme, and I had been saying for a long time that we needed more board games with that theme. I used to love the book as a kid. I loved all the movies. I don't know what it is about this theme. I just love the weird, wacky nature of it. So when I saw that Wonderland's War was coming out, I knew that this game would be something special, or at least I hoped. And when I played this game, my mind was blown at how dynamic and interesting this game truly is. You see, this is a drafting game and then a war game, and you repeat those 2 phases throughout. You're going to be drafting cards around a tea party, and you're going to be gaining support. You're going to be gaining Wonderlandians to help you fight in your good fight. You might be grabbing chips to add to your bag. But once you're done with that phase, then the game comes to life in all of that preparation that you did, all those supporters that you got, all of those Wonderlandians that you got, everything that you did in that phase now comes to fruition in this battling for Wonderland phase, where you are literally going around the table on these different regions and playing a huge game of push your luck. You see, these bags are filled with tokens that you start the game with. They can also be filled with bad tokens called madness that will start causing you to lose troops in a region. What you're going to be doing is 1 turn at a time, you're going to be pulling a chip out of the bag against your opponent, and you're going to basically be going as long as you can until you drop out. Now, this push your luck mechanic is super clean in the design, but the other thing that I love about this is that other players at the table, they can kind of be involved in every combat around the table. They can wager, they can say, I think that this player is going to win. I saw what they put in their bag. I know what they have, and I think that they will definitely win this region. So they might secretly wager that this faction wins, and they'll get a reward if that faction wins. So it's a way to kind of keep everybody at the table involved in each and every combat around the table. Now, these little tokens that you can put in your bag, they're all different and they can change based on the game. The variability here is insane. Each of these tokens does something different and has 4 different variations, and you can mix and match those in any way you want every single game. On top of that, every character that you play is different in the game. Like the Queen of Hearts, typically most players can only play supporters when they hire them in one region, but she can spread them between regions whenever she recruits them. Or you might be playing Alice in Wonderland, who's really good at creating relationships with the Wonderlandians, as well as having a lot of physical strength on the board, like her character herself as the hero. She can go to a region and she's very, very good at fighting against your opponents. Or you might be playing the Jabberwocky, my personal favorite, where you're going to be placing all of these poison tokens around the tea party so players can't take certain tiles. If they do take the tile, then they get that token and it goes in their bag. All these cool, wacky abilities. And really, this game has so much fun gameplay that I really just didn't expect it to be so darn good. Like all of the things that they do, they even made the 2-player mode really good. I think that this game has production value that is absolutely through the roof, which is, by the way, the first striking feature. The production value of this game is through the roof, friends. I've got obviously the deluxe edition, so it does look nice, but even the standard edition of the game looks absolutely gorgeous. You should check out pictures of both. You'll see this artwork, these game components are absolutely amazing. But the other striking feature has got to be the bag building mechanic. That bag building we've seen in Quacks and Quedlinburg, but we haven't really seen a bag building war game, and that is exactly what this is. There are moments that are so memorable in recent times playing this game, moments of yelling at each other, moments at pushing my luck way too far and then having all of the chips spill on me and I lose. Like, that is the kind of stuff that happens. It is so much wacky, wild fun, and I'm so glad that Wonderland's War exists. And that is why it made the top of my list for top game of 2022. That is it for the top 10 games that I played in 2022. What are the top games that you played in 2022? Are there any things that you would add to the list? Definitely comment down below. But that is it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Let's go ahead and drop the beat.